We have some more minutes to talk. Thank you all so much for your presentations. I would just like to trigger a conversation between you all because the idea of Liliana and I was to get you to speak to each other because you have many things in common. One of them being the love for plants, the interest in the knowledge of plants and the work in communities, and last but not least, the artistic medium of film, amongst others. So there's a lot to say. Maybe I'll start off with the first question because as you all work with the medium of film, I would like to know how you yourself as artists experience the use of film, also being on site with a camera in what you are doing, the way you are looking. I think that your work has also very specific, but also different ways of looking. Of being there in the space, and also of taking a distance or connecting through the camera. So, and my question also is inspired, of course, by all the knowledge of the long history of documentary working. I know you are not documentarists in a strict sense, but the self-reflection of using the camera has always been a very strong issue. So maybe you have something to say to this.
I don't know if I can say that much to this comment or question, because ever since I've started to work in Colombia, I actually have a camera team who takes on a lot of that work. Which relieves me a bit from thinking constantly about technicalities, about image making. And I can focus much more on the contents, which is really important in my current work, to be present in the conversation with everyone else, rather than focusing on angles and cutting and so on. So.
This is an answer to the question.
I can maybe say a few things. I have quite a difficult relationship, I guess, with the camera, and it depends on the situation, but for sure, if I do a project like Learning from Artemisia in Lubumbashi, there is a very complicated situation. I'm there as a white European, and I'm working with a collective of women in Lumata who work also in the fields and who grow this plant, and representation is really complicated because of course it immediately conjures cliches. So for me it was important to think about how I use the camera for the work that is going to be shown in Lubumbashi and how that work changes later on. So the work actually, it was difficult to talk about this, but I made video work which was shown in Lubumbashi, which is never shown again outside. And also a series of photographs. For example, I made portraits of all the women who asked me to make photographs of them. So there is a level of visibility which makes, which creates a visibility of this collective, of their work, what they do in the fields, which was very important to do locally. And I saw my work as a kind of mediator locally, that I would provide my service to them in a sense. And when I looked at this material afterwards, I realized that I cannot use this material in Europe. I cannot show this material because it shows African women working in the fields, and that just conjures so much exoticism, prejudice, all sorts of things. And also it's me as a white man holding the camera, showing them, it's just not okay. So the photographs, the portraits, were never shown again, and the video itself became, well, essentially something else, which was this letter that uses a reflective text accompanying stills of the video, but not the video itself, that tries to think about these positions and these questions of image making at the same time as I'm collaborating with the women on the garden and the project itself. So there is a shift, I suppose, which seemed really important to me and kind of essential. And it's different with the song because this was basically performed to the camera. It's something that is like, it's a performance that we created for the camera, and it's very different, the kind of, the consciousness of the performance itself. And it was a collaboration also in terms of kind of setting it up. So it's okay to show that. So yeah, so there is a kind of sense of editing that is both geographic and of course includes kind of these questions of representation.
Thanks. That is a great question, and I could spend hours talking about it. Because video and film are my main tool of research, but also creation and also as a voice in a personal level, no? But also in communities, it is the main tool for triggering the new things happen, the new possibilities. It is the way of the tool to open frames and shake it up, and new things happen. So also, I've been working in communities where youth, they are not that interested in traditional knowledge. So through the use of cameras, video, or sound, they are really going into a different worlds. No? So it's been a trigger in most of my work. Also, it is the main tool in the creation of archives. As in the case of Palenque and Panama, but also personally, I have a large body of work with a plant that was planted by the US Army around the Panama Canal area. And facing the lack of archive, I start traveling around for the last 13 years, creating my personal archive, no? My own reading. So also there is difference, or a big difference for me, work with video than work with film. I feel I research with video and I write with film. Film, you have just 3 minutes in 16 millimeter or Super 8. Also the developing process, it is completely different. So now, for example, I'm working so deeply with plants that I'm developing with plants the actual film. Talking about representation, well, that is a tricky. I never turn on the camera if I don't feel admiration for the person or the context that I'm filming. Why? Because I know that later I'm going to spend years with this person in my life. So also in the process of, I'm not a documentary artist, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a media. I love media, so I'm really techie. I know how to work with different kind of cameras, so I prefer to go to the communities and give the tools so they can do their own self-representation. As you said, also, I've been invited to participate in many funeral rituals in San Basilio de Palenque. I have an incredible archive that, of course, I will never show. That is for the community. Even, I remember one moment where I knew what was coming. It was the most important moment when the body, when the soul leaves and the spirits come and they communicate, no? So a person came and say, don't stop recording, because that is the clue moment. And I say, no, like you don't have to record everything. So as important as it is to understand when to turn it on, is also when to turn it off.
So maybe I would like to engage you with a question regarding the idea of collaboration and cooperation. You all work with plans which are embedded in diverse epistemologies and time frames, and as you all know, cultivation takes a lot of time. You can even not really record it, and that way you mentioned, you show the Artemisia afra, which was then 6 months old, and so how do you, and also your project with the forest, it started with Forest Law, but also in Forest Mind, how do you engage as an artist to converse with these different time scales embedded in nature, in plants and seeds, and also how you engage with the other understanding of these times which are part of the local epistemologies and the, so to speak, traditional indigenous knowledges. And to connect to the question Fabienne just asked, why maybe your aesthetic choice or artistic choice might help you, and how it helps you to unfold this kind of time in plants, in seeds, in specimens, in the idea of growth, and the idea of healing and cultivation.
Okay, I mean it's a complicated question, but really important, and I think the temporality of working with plants means that we need to follow their temporality. It cannot be ours. So if you want to grow plants, you need to start early. You need time. You need to allow them time to grow. I mean, it's very simple, but it's important, and it creates also tensions with the system of exhibitions and the timelines of exhibitions and your invitation. So I think it's an important kind of way to make us realize that sometimes we are asked to work too fast, and we need to react too fast and produce too fast. And so plants help me personally to slow down. And so in the case of learning from Artemisia, we planted 6 months before the opening. In London, we started the whole process 1 year before with the workshops, with speaking about plants and then growing them later. So that was a year, and thinking about the plants on the mountain peaks, we had to wait for a year for the mountain peak to become accessible and not covered in snow in order to go there. And it's a very short time where the plants actually grow. Kind of spring, summer is very, very short. It's like 1.5 months, 2 months where it's kind of happening. So there is a kind of like a sort of humility, I suppose, that we need to adopt, where we need to defer to the timetable of plants. So when we speak about more than human entanglements and collaborations and all of this, there are real consequences of how we work. And the second part of the aesthetic choices, I guess, is trying to think of how we make work and show work that can be sensitive to these kinds of situations and changes and temporalities. Maybe how that can translate into a kind of slowing down of the gaze of the viewer. I think I already evoked the fact that climate change images are these fast images of catastrophes that change quickly, and we see fires in all sorts of places. So what happens when we see plants that essentially are there growing, but are actually quite dramatic protagonists? It changes the way we see things, hopefully.
My work is maybe more about the knowledge of plants than the actual growing of plants. But in the context of this indigenous university, or the development of an indigenous university, we there was also a mention of not only to learn about plants, but to actually restore a big patch of land that used to be forest, and to look at indigenous techniques of how to restore the tropical forest, because they have been using this technology and this knowledge for a long time. And I would be really interested in following that process, following the elders and the people with traditional medicinal knowledge and giving instruction about collecting the seeds and then actually planting it, how they plant a combination of seeds that will actually then reproduce a kind of a tropical forest that used to be there. And to actually document that would mean I would have to go back many times to actually follow the growth of the forest to even get a sense of what's happening there. But it's and that of course will also be part of the education process of the students who will sign up for this university. But that hasn't happened yet. So for now, I'm more connected to the knowledge of plants than actually doing workshops with the plants themselves.
Time. Time is such a human concept. So I have a lot of problem with that. Also, because in this process of following plants and getting within the plants and encounter with plants, I feel that more and more the speed, maybe similar what you just mentioned, that speed that I always have by doing different things and running around. So plants are the one that really have shown me there are different kind of space, of rhythm. That is somehow an internal space of the time, or the deep time, the famous deep time. So I have different kind of projects, from sitting to just observing, to being with plants. And so in this kind of, so to me, time becomes a scale. No? So I was filming plants for many years, following the growing of different plants in different places, in Panama, in Colombia, in Ethiopia. But I was also always moving, and follow their internal rhythm of the plant. So if the plant is growing, if I want to see it when it flowers, because it is the most visible moment, and I want to show that it is the so-called invasive plant, I have to go to Panama in November. Okay, so I was marked by my conception of time, no? But then I spent the last year, when I got COVID, at home, stuck at home with COVID, and grieving, or living the pain of the death of my mother. So that change of scale became a space for spending time with the plant at home. So I spent 3 months or more with more than 60 plants that friends, migrant friends, I worked with migrant plants. As you were saying that the plants move, oh yeah, they move in different ways, but also we move them to be able to transform our context now. So this is a long research that I have, and I got like 60 plants at home. So by being in the place, by changing the scale and being with, which is something that we don't allow ourselves anymore, spend time in the land, in the territory, to be able to get the knowledge, no? I'm going there later. But then I spent so much time with the plant at home that I start to feel a different kind of connection with them just by being there, just by spending the time in my conception of time, and understanding their kind of cognition. It was through the smell. So I'm going to talk about that later, or tomorrow, actually. But that connected me with one of my main teachings in San Basilio de Palenque with elders. It was, if you want to get the knowledge, if you want to learn, you have to spend time. Change your scale, low down, and we have a meal together. We cook together. And the knowledge will arrive at some point. So you don't ask for it, you deserve it by stay there, by changing the scale and spending time. So that is my main learning with plants. I want to invite you also to check our website. It's called earth2tables.org. It is another of my collective in Canada, which is a food sovereignty platform to gather this kind of conversations and how indigenous in the north, we are having conversation with the indigenous in Central America about this, about food sovereignty and time, actually.
Okay, we can maybe collect one or two short questions, and then we ask you to somehow resonate to it in a rather short way.
I was going to ask a bit of what you just said, of your learning process with the plants and how you have learned to hear them or smell them and to gather that knowledge in your own practice. And I was curious if, because I kind of relate that disposition as being really sensible and hearing, and I can imagine that that's something something that is very needed when you're on a collective process, and you need to really stay alert and be enough present to hear what's the conversation needed in that moment, or the as you were showing before, the need of the young people from Panama to talk more about the violence than the water. And I was curious to ask if you find time or you find necessary at some point to share your personal experience with the research of plants in your collective process with others.
Oh, wow, thank you. There are many questions. I'm going to start from the end. So yes, right now, I said, so the collective supports the production of individual work that goes back to the collective somehow, no? So I'm feeling right now, a lot of my research, my personal research with plants is going back into the different collective. So all my new works now are based somehow in gardens, one garden in Panama with mangroves, in a restoration of mangrove land. Another in Colombia with a restoration also with a mangrove land, and the presence of the cattail, which is a plant that is native in Canada, and I've been researching it as a native, beloved plant by indigenous communities. But in Colombia, it is a so-called invasive one that is killing the local ones, no, or the mangroves. So that kind of relationships. Now I'm trying to move that into the work within communities. So definitely, it needs to start right there for the teachings or the learnings more, like how to see plants in a different way, not to read them just with the tools that we have as a humans. So I'm trying to think how to transform the space of the plant as a space of the dislocation. That's why I was naming Carrasco in Cadagia in a group of really interesting Latin American feminists that they are talking about dislocation. no? Like how to be flexible in different spaces, but also dislocate and move the given frames, and to be able to open up as a different ways of communications, of cognition, like, here, especially with plants. So it's been a challenge, but yeah, we are going now there. In my in the work in the collective, this horizontality in the pedagogies and the knowledge now is gonna bring us or move us into that. No, for example. Yeah. So, for example, as simple as how can I explain that at home? No, when I changed that scale of the perception with the plant, I open up to be able to understand that I went to check an eucalypt plant that I have. I was super sick with COVID, and I went to water them, and then the plant gave me kind of like 50 leaves, and I started picking them up and take them up, and then I smell them, and somehow the vapors of the eucalypt plant came into my brain or my nose, and I start breathing differently. So I say, oh, so you are taking care of me. So it is really being open, or to be able to read or to learn about all these simple moments, simple smells or textures, or.
Maybe I just quickly, quick question to you, Ursula, because so in the other two presentations, the garden was present, and in yours it wasn't. It was more the forest, the Amazon. Could you maybe talk a little bit, or what this kind of relation, how it is different between the communities that live and work within a forest compared to ones that have a garden and tend to a garden? And yeah, I mean, if we still have time, then maybe the other two can also join in, and maybe also think about how through climate change, gardens are also changing epistemologically. Like, what does that mean? Uriel, you mentioned, for example, the growth of plants on summits. What does that exactly mean for people that are working in a garden in, say, Lubumbashi or in Palenque, a magical place, by the way? Yeah, just briefly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, the people living in these forests, they have gardens. The chakras are gardens, but they don't look as organized as we are used to in our kind of suburbs. It's planting useful plants among the others that are already there. These are kind of research gardens in a way, to see what you can use, medicinal gardens. But to pick up what you mentioned about how we interact with plants and what we can learn from plants or hear from plants directly, I think in the indigenous context that really goes much further than just sensing plants, because medicinal knowledge really is focusing first and foremost on ayahuasca, which is really what the shamans are practicing. And it is a psychoactive plant that really communicates almost like in a telepathic communication with the brain, with the human brain. So this kind of communication is much more intense and direct, and communicates through images, through words, through hearing, through voice, through anything that we know. So that's why probably the fascination with that plant has survived over centuries, and they had to hide in the mountains to keep that knowledge alive in the, under threat through the colonialists. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I can maybe just, I have two thoughts about the difference between gardens and kind of locations outside. And in terms of gardens, I always think about Foucault's sort of thinking about garden as a heterotopia, where basically it's kind of a place where many places come together. So it's not a natural place, of course. And of course, there's lots of different kinds of gardens, whether they're sort of indigenous gardens or whether they're European gardens, medicinal gardens. There's a long history, of course, also how these gardens have been used and abused. But I'm quite interested in this kind of complex sort of, the kind of heterotopic quality of gardens. And when I think about places outside and the plants, I'm thinking about this notion of plant communities, which has kind of evolved, where we don't just think about individual plants, but we think about plants growing in certain areas. So summit plants, the kind of, if you have the top 7 meters, there's a kind of plant community there. And what happens with climate change is that that community changes over time. And initially you think, oh, maybe that's a good thing. There was only one plant in 1835 and now there's 16 species. So there's actually an increase of biodiversity. So it must be good. But what happens is that it's kind of counterintuitive in that the plants that are there initially are highly specialized to survive in these conditions where there is very little sun and warmth and there's a lot of snow and these kinds of things. And the plants that come sort of through the warming of the climate that can adapt to live there are all-rounders that are very strong and basically eventually kick the rest out. So there is a kind of, you would have initially an increase of biodiversity and eventually a loss of biodiversity. So it's quite, I think we need to look very closely at what these communities look like. If we think about plants as communities, what do they look like and how do they change and what does that mean for us?
Yeah, I'm going to continue with your idea, actually. When plants start disappear, when plants stop being named, the knowledge of the plants disappear. And with it, and with them, all the entangle of humans, plants, relations, and resistance, and all the heritage of that knowledge disappear too. So that can be called biodiversity. So yeah, we already know the problem of the monocultures. No? So in Palenque San Basilio, I have been learning, we don't talk about climate change, but we are really embodied nowadays, especially with a medicinal plant or a medicine system that is based on temperature. So plants that grow in a fresh place will be good for sickness in the body that produce heat. So now what is happening is that they don't know how to identify anymore the fresh or the hot plant because they are getting moved from the space. As you said, that you start seeing or finding plants from a fresh place into a hot place. So plants that normally grow by the river, a river that, by the way, is getting dry now. So you don't find any more the plants there, but you are seeing it in the plaza. So the system is completely changing. So the knowledge is getting lost, but also we don't know yet what is happening internally, like in the chemistry of the component. If the plant is also changing internally, so who knows what is going to happen if they are going to continue with medicinal or not.
Thank you, Ursula and Uriel and Alexandra. Thank you, the audience, to spend the time with us tonight. I think time invites us to close the session today, and we are running our human time and not able to adjust to a more slower temporality. So, but you're very welcome to come tomorrow. We have another second session, and we are pleased to have our next guest, which is he is here with us, TJ Demos. So we are looking forward to listening to you tomorrow. Thank you to all, also to you, Fabienne, and see you tomorrow then all again, I hope. Thanks.